Welcome to Wetlands Live, a distance learning adventure. My name is Sarah Borio, and I'm your host for today's program. I work for the U.S. Forest Service, which manages approximately 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands throughout the United States. That's about the size of Texas. Wetlands Live is encouraging students and adults to learn more about wetlands and to get outside and get involved in these important and interesting places. You'll find more information at the web address on your screen. Thousands of students from Alaska to Maryland are watching this program live, and Shaw TV is helping us with the broadcast. I'd like to welcome all of you. Today we're going to be wading into the wetlands here at Boundary Bay near Vancouver, Canada. We're going to get a little bit muddy and find out all about the wonders of wetlands. This place is full of life. Right now I'm surrounded by millions of creatures. Why is that? We're going to find out during today's program. Boundary Bay is located, you guessed it, right on the boundary of the United States and Canada. Wetlands connect us in lots of ways. Sometimes they connect states, provinces, and countries, like right here at Boundary Bay. And they also provide important links and connections for fish, birds, and other wildlife. Wetlands are used by juvenile fish as nurseries. The vegetation protects them from predators and strong currents, and there's an abundance of food. Birds also need a healthy chain of wetlands during migration. And Boundary Bay has been designated an official important bird area because it provides a rich ecosystem for migrant and wintering shorebirds. We're lucky to have the help of a number of students today, and I'd like to introduce Maya, a student here in British Columbia, Canada, who has been actively involved in protecting a wetland in Vancouver. We're going to hear more about Maya's story later in the program, but right now Maya's going to introduce us to who else is helping with today's wetland investigations.
Yes, we have students from Miss Cotter's class who attend Beech Grove Elementary School, located near here. And this is Lynn Pollard, who's an environmental educator. Can you tell us a little bit about what your group is doing today?
Yes, we're actually going to look at the beginning of the thing in a sense, although it's all cyclical, plants and the critters are in the mud, and seeing how they play in the whole system.
And this is Ruth Foster and Rod McVicker with the Pacific Wildlife Foundation. What is your group going to be doing today?
We're going to be seining, which means we're going to be pulling a big long net into the shore to see what kinds of fish and other creatures live here.
And I'd like to introduce Holly Middleton, who's a bird biologist. What is your group going to be doing?
I'm going to be taking these kids out and we're going to be looking at the birds and we're going to be learning how to count, how scientists count birds, and I'm going to get them to identify some birds and report back and see what we found.
Okay, thanks Maya. We're going to check back later in the program to see what you found out. Now I'd like to introduce Miranda Anderson, who's an environmental filmmaker here in British Columbia. Miranda, what are we going to learn while we wade into the wetlands today?
We're going to learn about what makes a wetland, the different kind of wetlands, the functions of wetlands and why they're important, the threats to these important ecosystems, and how to help wetlands. Back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. I'd also like to let our viewers know that we're going to be taking your questions about wetlands during the program. You can send them into the email address on your screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible, and we have the help of a number of special guest experts. We've got Dr. Chris Arp, a hydrologist from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Kate Mohat, a botanist with the Forest Service on the Copper River Delta in Alaska, Chris DiCorrado and Catherine Jardine with Bird Studies Canada, and we also have fisheries experts Andrew Morin and Luca Adelfio. In addition, we're going to be playing a fun game. It's called the Wetland Eye Quiz. Miranda, tell us about that.
Yes, we're going to be testing your knowledge and playing a game. 4 times during this program, we're going to ask a question, and you'll be able to answer. For those of you watching the program on the television, you'll need to go to the web address on your screen. For those of you watching the webcast on your computer, the questions and possible answers will be on the web page where you're viewing this program. You'll have a couple of minutes to wade in with your answers, and we'll show you the percentage of classrooms that get the question right. So make sure you pay attention. We're going to test your knowledge a little to get started. The first question is, wetlands are important because A, they provide habitat for plants and animals, B, help filter and clean water, C, provide recreational opportunities for people, or D, all of the above. So what do you think? Go to the web address on your screen now. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Miranda. This game is going to be fun, so everybody make sure to enter. Now I'd like to introduce Della Young, a student, and Rick Swanson, a Forest Service biologist. They're joining us from a wetland in Virginia on the east coast of the United States. And they're going to start us off by helping us to understand what a wetland is. Let's have a look.
Hi, I'm here at the Occoquan Bay National Wildlife Refuge in Woodbridge, Virginia. You may think I'm waded into an icky, yucky mess. But this wetland is full of life and home to a huge variety of plants and animals. Some animals are really interesting, like ducks, beavers, and turtles. And some aren't too appealing, like mosquitoes. But they are all important. But what is a wetland anyway? I'd like to introduce Rick Swanson, who is an aquatic biologist at the Forest Service, who will help us understand this important habitat.
Hi, Dell. Wetlands are the link or transition zones between the dry uplands and the open water. They are normally saturated year-long with water or on a seasonal basis. The amount and the quantity and the timing of the water entering the wetland affects both the soil and the types of vegetation and animal communities living within them.
So, are all wetlands the same?
Good question. Wetlands can vary widely because of regional and local differences in the soil, in the surrounding vegetation, the land types, the climate, the water quantity and quality, and other factors. Because of the different conditions found in wetlands, wetlands provide habitat for some very rare and critical and important plant and animal communities. Wetlands are found from the Arctic all the way down to the tropics and on every continent except Antarctica.
So wetlands are really very special places and provide an important link between water and land.
That's right.
Now, back to Canada.
Thanks, Della and Rick, for that explanation. Now let's have a look at the wetlands here. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rob Butler, a biologist who has worked in Boundary Bay for many years.
I've been here for, must be 20, 30 years working in this bay, and it's one of the spectacular wetlands here on the Pacific coast. Many wetlands have a similar kind of features. They all have water, they all have plants like these ones behind us that can tolerate the water, and they all have this mucky soil. You can see around us this mucky, look at this stuff. This is what they like. And the way it works here on the coast is the water moves in and out because of tides. This is something that's typical on all coastal areas. So the tide right now is a long, long way out behind us, but in a few hours, all that water is going to come in here, and this is going to be all wet where we're standing. And as a result of that, all of these plants have to be able to tolerate this too. They have to know that their feet are going to get wet. Not only do they get wet, but they get wet with salt water, because that's the Pacific Ocean behind us. As a result of that, the water that's coming in with all that salt would kill all the other kinds of plants, but these are special plants that live only in the salt water. So that makes it a coastal wetland. It's an estuary wetland. We also have some water coming in here, some fresh water just to the side of me, and it's coming from behind us on the land. And it's mixing with the salt water, and it creates what is called an estuary. An estuary is a place where the fresh water and the salt water mix. And so again, you get some other distinctive plants that will be only found in this estuary. So here on the coast, we have estuary wetlands and we have saltwater wetlands. And both of these are wetlands like other ones. They all are wet. They all have the salt tolerant plants. They all have the wet plants, and they have the wet mud. So that's what makes Boundary Bay so special.
Thanks, Rob. So now we know that wetlands are the same in some important ways, but there are different kinds of wetlands. Before we learn about them, let's get back to the game. I think Miranda's got some answers for us and is going to give us the next question.
Yes, thanks. We've got your answers, and 83% of you answered correctly. Congratulations. The correct answer was D, all of the above. Wetlands do provide habitats for plants and animals, clean and filter water, and provide areas for recreation. Good job. Our second question is, all wetlands have A, water, B, land, C, water and land, or D, people. Okay, you can respond now by going to the web address on your screen. This question and the possible answers are there. Back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. Okay, our student group that you met earlier has been out investigating mud and plants since this morning. Maya, tell us what they've found.
I'm back with Mr. Lynn Pollard and this group of students. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys have been doing?
Basically, what we've been doing is exploring out in the marsh. A lot of mud, looking under things, digging a little bit, doing a little bit of quadrat surveys, and just basically looking around to see what we could see.
What are some of the things that you guys have found?
Well, the kids are going to show you. Okay, let's start with the plants. Could you tell us what this is?
This is sedge.
Because
Sedge have points and sedges have edges.
Wow.
This is eelgrass. It's basically has like animals, little teeny animals in them.
That's so cool.
Go ahead.
This is pickleweed. Surprisingly, this is actually edible. This is gooseflint.
Sorry, what was it?
Gooseflint.
Goosefoot, yeah.
Cool.
And we got one more. Arrowgrass is just an
This is arrowgrass.
Ooh.
Okay, and one more, right?
This is a grass button, and they would grow in little clumps on the grounds around here.
Now, why are all of these important?
Oh, well, they're important because they provide the foodstuffs. As they die off, of course, they turn into like this, like the eelgrass, and then, of course, everything else eats them, and we want to show you a few of the bugs that eat them. Okay? Let's go. Who's got the rat-tailed maggot? Who has the rat-tailed maggot? Natasha? Yes, yeah, rat-tailed maggot. Okay, there it is. And point it out. That's a rat-tailed maggot. Yeah, rat-tailed maggot. Just say it's a rat-tailed maggot.
This is a rat-tailed maggot.
It's a baby fly.
And it's a baby fly.
Yeah, cool. And then we have. Who's doing amphipods? And these are
Amphipods, we found hundreds of them.
Yeah, they're all over the place. Right. How about what else have we got? Oh, who's doing the backwater boat? Yeah.
These are backwater boatmen, and we found millions of them in one little pond.
Yeah, they're all condensed in one little pond. Is that everybody? And I'm just going to do the worms because they're so important. And these are the worms, and we found thousands and millions of them. And of course, they're doing the job of turning everything back into soil, which they do so well.
There are so many bugs living just here in the mud. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Maya. And thanks to the kids for that close look at mud and plants. So now we know that all wetlands share similar characteristics, but there are different kinds. Some have trees and others have grass. Some are wet year-round and some are wet only part of the year. Wetlands are called swamps, marshes, prairie potholes, lagoons, bogs, or mudflats. So there are lots of different names for wetlands. Let's go back to Della and Rick, and they're going to tell us more about these different kinds of wetlands.
Wetlands come in all sizes and shapes. Now we're at a pond at the Occoquan Bay National Wildlife Refuge, and at this pond obviously has the transition zone that you described between land and water. It's got some sedges, reeds, and grasses. Mr. Swanson, can you tell us the different kinds of wetlands?
Generally, wetlands fall into 4 different categories: marshes, swamps, bogs, and fens. Now, marshes, as we're standing here, as you pointed out, are dominated by sedges and reeds and grasses. The second type are swamps, which are primarily composed of woody plants like trees or shrubs. Both marshes and swamps can occur in saltwater, freshwater, and brackish water. Now, bogs are a special wetland. They're a freshwater wetland composed of spongy peat deposits, evergreen trees, shrubs, and a floor that's covered by a thick moss called sphagnum moss. The last one are fens. Fens are freshwater peat-forming wetlands, like bogs, but are covered by mostly grasses, sedge, reeds, and wildflowers.
So there is an incredible diversity of wetlands. Back to you in Canada.
Thanks, Rick and Della. Now I'm going to invite Rob back to tell us about the characteristics of this wetland. Thanks, Rob.
This is an amazing wetland. As I mentioned earlier, it is a coastal wetland, and it's a very extensive one. This is Boundary Bay, and it's maybe about 10 miles wide. So this marsh extends down this way a long, long way, and this way a long, long way. It's quite unusual, actually, to see these kind of wetlands on the coast, because north of here, in Alaska, it's mostly rocky shoreline, and here in British Columbia, it's also rocky. But when you get to the southern end of British Columbia, we find Boundary Bay. And that's why this wetland is so important. It's rare here on the coast. There's lots of rocky places, but this one is soft and muddy, and it attracts a lot of birds. Now, one of the reasons that this is so important for birds is not only that it's rare, but because of all the food that's here. And this is one thing that Lynn was just talking about, all the invertebrates, all the things that are growing here. And as this tide comes up, each time it comes up, it's bringing nutrients with it. And it's feeding this wetland. And every time those plants die and break down, they're providing food for all those invertebrates, all those little amphipods and all the little worms that are here in the mud. And those then provide the food for all the birds and the fish that are here. It's because of these changing levels of tide that make this such an important place. And that's how it functions, that's how it works. These plants that are living here, of course, they're adapted to this site. It means they live here, and this is the only place they live. Not only is it important for birds, as we talked about, and all those worms and so on, but it's also important for fish. One of them being salmon, of course. When the salmon come out of the Fraser River, which is just north of us here, there are literally millions of them, and they need a place to go. They come into these wetlands and they use it as a nursery. And it's a very important place for them. There's other fish too, and lots more, and we'll have a look at them later, all the different ones that are here. If we think about just the birds that are here behind us, we can't see very much today, but there are thousands of birds just behind us, a little bit further out on this mudflat. Thousands of ducks that have come from Alaska. There's some of the geese that have come and flown in from Russia. There's hundreds of species that come down here. We have maybe 250 species just here in Boundary Bay. And they're going to the south, going down into South America, some of them going as far as Peru and Ecuador. And you think of this, that it's all linked together. Those birds nesting in Alaska, flying, landing in Boundary Bay, fueling up, getting the food here, and then flying on down into South America. It's really quite an amazing story. One last little bit I want to talk about is just on the mud itself. It just looks like mud, and it looks kind of goopy and so on. But there's a little surface thing called biofilm that's living on the surface, and we've just discovered that this is really important for these shorebirds. The shorebirds slurp them up with their bills, and they turn this into the fat, which allows them to make the migration. So this is really a critical piece in this food web, this biofilm that's just living on the surface. It looks stinky and muddy and all the rest, but it's actually really important for these birds. So this is one of the key things about these wetlands. It's this coastal movement of these tides coming in, the plants, all the animals, the invertebrates, the biofilm, all living together and creating this great place called Boundary Bay.
Thanks for that description. That was great, Rob. Thank you. There are so many different kinds of wetlands that we want to show you a few more. Let's take a look at this video. So there are lots of different kinds of wetlands all over the world. Maya has been involved in volunteering to preserve a bog at Stanley Park in Vancouver. Bogs are a special kind of wetland found in low-lying areas where groundwater sits on the surface or where rain or snow saturates the soil. Let's see a video about Maya and Stanley Park Bog.
Hi, I'm Maya Lampa. I'm a student who lives in Vancouver, and right now we're in Stanley Park at the Secret Bog right by Beaver Lake, which is behind me. So bogs and the water in it, it comes in, and there's, just like in lakes, there's some water that will stay for longer than others, but the water typically will come in and be filtered by the plants and then leave much cleaner than it came in. I was first interested in Stanley Park from my mom, who brought me to Beaver Lake. She just showed me all the animals living in Stanley Park. And then I spoke at Parks Board about the dredging of Beaver Lake and removing some of the invasive species. And someone emailed my mom and told her about a grant from Vancouver Foundation. I applied for the grant and I came in here and I just was amazed by how special it was, and I saw some sundews, and the other part about bogs that amazed me was that people are actually getting rid of them when they're part of the things that's helping to filter the water that goes through our watersheds. I've been coming in with the Stanley Park Ecology Society and restoring this bog by removing some of the invasive species like the salal, which are non-bog species, and helping to open up the area for the species such as the sphagnum moss and the sundews, bog laurel, and Labrador tea, and helping to improve the overall health of the bog, and by doing that also improving the health of Beaver Lake. Some of my favorite plants in the bogs are the sundews, which are carnivorous plants that need the low nutrients and the acidity in the bog to thrive. And they eat small insects such as damselflies and flies because they can only grow to be about a finger tall if they're big. And the way that they eat the bugs is, instead of being like a Venus flytrap and snapping shut on the bug really quickly, they have little balls of dew-like fluid on them, and it's sticky and the bugs get trapped on it, and then it slowly closes. And when they digest the bugs, they use about as much energy as they get from the bugs to digest them. And they're flowering right now, which means they have a tall green stem above them with little white balls that are like their flowers that they use with bugs to pollinate them. And the same bugs that will pollinate them are the ones that they'll eat. Bogs act like sponges because they have a lot of this moss and the peat moss in them, and peat moss is just dead sphagnum moss. And sphagnum can absorb up to 20 times the amount of water of its body weight, and it absorbs so much water that when the summer comes and it starts to release that water, the little pods in the sphagnum moss will actually burst, and it sends out the little seeds almost that will reseed sphagnum in another area.
Thanks, Maya. You've done a great job at that park, and thank you for showing us all the things that make it a very special wetland. Now it's time to get back to our Wetland Eye quiz, and I'm passing it over to Miranda for our latest results.
Yes, we've got the results to question 2, and 97% of you answered correctly. The correct answer was C. All wetlands have both water and land. Now we're going to go to our third question. Are you ready? Which of these is not a wetland? A, ocean, B, mangrove swamp, C, marsh, or D, fen? Okay, you can respond now by going to the web address on your screen. This question and the possible answers are there. Good luck. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Miranda. So we've learned about what makes up wetlands and the different types of wetlands. But why do we care about wetlands anyway? Let's go back to Della and Rick, and we're going to learn about the functions of wetlands and why they are so incredibly important.
This little wetland doesn't look like much. I'm not even sure why we're here. We're right next to an office building and surrounded by parking lots. So why is this wetland important?
Good question, Della. The retention pond provides a great example of some functions of wetlands. Let's talk about them. First and foremost is water storage and groundwater recharge. When water comes off of that parking lot or that impervious surface that you were talking about, the water is stored here and released into the groundwater for ultimate release during drought or low water flows, benefiting both people who use the water and the wildlife and fisheries that depend on it. Another example is improving water quality. Wetlands filter, remove, and store nutrients, sediments, and other pollutants. By improving the water quality, you're improving it for both wildlife and people. Wetlands also, by storing the water here, reduce the temperature, and thermal effects can be significant. Vegetation and the groundwater cools the temperature of the water, so the water can be utilized for, again, by both people and by wildlife. Perhaps one of the biggest examples of uses for a wetland, wetlands serve as nurseries. They provide critical habitat for thousands of species of aquatic and terrestrial plants and animals. Another example of a use of a wetland would be flood and shore protection. When rivers overflood or hurricanes strike coastal communities, wetlands help to absorb and slow floodwaters and also storm surges, providing protection for both people and property. Wetlands also provide recreational educational opportunities. Wetlands are great for recreating and learning, boating, photography, nature watch, and maybe just enjoying some quiet time once in a while. All these uses result in economic benefit to people. The cost to communities to provide these different functions in the absence of a wetland would be astronomical.
I did not realize that wetlands are so important in so many ways for people and wildlife. Back to you in Canada.
Thanks for that great explanation about the functions of wetlands out there on the East Coast. But what about the functions here at Boundary Bay? I'm bringing back Rob Butler to answer that question now. Thanks for joining us again, Rob.
You know, the bay here is really an important place, as we've talked about, but one of the things you don't really see that it does is it functions as a big filter. And many wetlands do this all around the world, of course, but this one here is filtering all the water that's coming largely from the ocean, but also the agricultural lands behind us. So it provides a filter for all the nutrients and things that are flowing back and forth between the land above us and the ocean behind us. So they all are basically the same, the wetlands. The wetlands also provide protection from floods and provide some shoreline protection. So if we get a big storm up here, the wetland will slow it down. The wetland stops the waves from coming in and destroying the edge of the beach here. So it provides that as well. But one of the other things that we're mostly interested in is, of course, the birds that come through here. The millions of birds that use these areas, these wetlands, every year. They're like special places, special airports for these birds as they migrate north from their wintering grounds down in South and Central America, right up into the north. And Boundary Bay does that. It provides one of those places. There's a lot of energy-rich food here, and the next stop may be thousands and thousands of miles away. So this is really a key place for all these birds, and that's why they're here. One of the most important functions is also that of a nursery for many animals, for both fish and for birds. We have lots of species of fish out here. There's little sticklebacks, and there's salmon, and there's gunnels, and all kinds of other ones that come up here and grow and live here when they're very, very young in this wetland. So the small fish use the wetlands to grow. Birds use the wetlands not only to eat, but also some of them come here to nest and raise their young. The wetlands in the north, in Alaska, in Canada are especially important. They are chock-a-block full of birds. So those wetlands are absolutely key. All of these things provide this function as a really important place for birds, and they really are treasures for all of us.
Thanks again, Rob. So let's have a closer look at what's in this wetland. There's a group of students who are out seining in the eelgrass. They've been dragging a net, and we're going to see what's living out there in the eelgrass beds. But first, let's answer a couple of questions while they're seining. The third graders at Christ the King School in Chicago, Illinois want to know what group of animals has been most threatened by the loss of wetlands. Rob, can you help them out?
Well, it's lots of animals that live specifically in these wetlands, and they really are sensitive to them. So right here in British Columbia, right here in Boundary Bay, ones like the great blue heron that nest around here, they really are dependent on this wetland. This is where they catch fish, and where they really are dependent on having this wetland. Unfortunately, it's set aside and protected for them. So some of them are specific to these wetlands, and they really need to have these special places.
Well, great. And we also would like to give a shout out to our students out in watching in Panama. What birds do we have here that have spent winters in Panama?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Sarah. This is really an important feature of Boundary Bay. Boundary Bay is on the migratory route for shorebirds migrating from the breeding grounds up in Alaska to places like Panama. And we have birds coming through here, hundreds of thousands of them in the spring and in the fall, the western sandpiper in particular, that will land here and refuel, feeding on all those little invertebrates that we talked about. And they'll use that as fuel and fly all the way down to Panama. And we know that because we've been down to Panama and we put bands on the birds, and we've seen them right here on Boundary Bay. So we know they're connected.
Wow. Okay, well let's go back out to Maya and learn what they have found out in the eelgrass. Maya.
This has been so much fun out here. I'm out here with Ruth Foster and Rod McVicker, and we've been out here seining, and let's see what they found in this net here. Ruth, what have you found in here?
Okay,
We're finding an awful lot of fish here. This is why this wetland is such a nursery. Look at all this stuff, guys.
Look at all the fish.
We're starting to put them into little viewing chambers.
Look at that.
And I think the kids can tell you what we've got
who needs
here.
fish?
Let's see if we can put these guys in.
And what I'll do is we'll get them in a group for you.
Let's begin to get a look at them. And
take some over to the tray.
And I think I saw something quite big in here a minute ago.
Okay.
Where did it go?
Here we go. And you can go over to the white tray behind me.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay, Bram.
Coming in on
Maybe over to the white. Okay.
They're not dead.
There must be hundreds of fish in here.
Okay.
What do you
You can go over to
I
a
think
white
we have
tray.
thousands in here, maybe.
Yeah.
What do you think? Oh, look at this, guys.
Oh.
Wow.
What have we got here?
We
What
got,
have we got?
let's put this in a little viewing chamber. So we can, or maybe into a... Oh.
What kind of fish is that one?
Does anyone know what this one is called? I think I'll put it in an aquarium. That'd be better.
Bullhead or something?
Bullhead.
Okay.
That's a pretty cool fish.
Right in between here with me.
Another bullhead?
And you guys with
A
your...
bullhead, yeah.
You can dump your trays in here,
put some
and then
water
we'll
in it
look
and
at
hold
them
it
better.
up.
Okay.
This is also called a sculpin.
Now look at your tray.
They've got lovely flat fins that
Now let's
cling
look
to the
here.
cling to the bottom, and it just scoots along and gobbles things up. I wonder if it would eat some of the other
all
fish that are in
sculpins?
here.
No, they're all...
Baby fish in here.
Oh, you have? Oh.
Look at that guy.
Okay, and we go, look at those.
Now where's Bram? Because Bram knows what these fish are.
They're three-spine sticklebacks.
Do you want to come over here and look at these
Oh.
ones?
Yeah, and we'll look here.
I think Maya might
Maybe.
like to
Let's
know
put
what you
some
know
water in
about them.
here.
Can you come in here
Have we
beside me?
Dump some water
What
from the
kind of
bucket
fish is
in
it
there.
that you guys
Just a
have been
bit of-
finding
and
in
what
these
we'll do,
nets?
can
The
you look at them
ones that you
carefully
find
and see if you can
hundreds or
trace-
thousands of.
Three-spine sticklebacks.
Can you see three hoop?
And do you know why they're called
Can you see
three-spine
three
sticklebacks?
spines on them? Look at them
I
very
think
close
they have
and
two
look at their
big
backs.
spines and they
Let's put some
have
water in
one
here.
more somewhere.
Look at them very
One more
closely.
little spine.
And
Yeah.
look at their
Right.
backs
That's
and
right.
see
And
if you
Bram, do
can
you notice
see.
we've caught something
I'll
else
give you
here?
a bit more. We'll give you some more to
We
look.
also have a
See if you can
bullhead.
see on their
A
back.
bullhead or a sculpin, yeah. And it's got a gigantic big mouth. And I'll bet you if we left it in here for a while, it might eat a whole bunch of those other fish that are in here, all the stickleback that are in here.
Why is it that the stickleback have the spines on their back?
This is eel
That's something we are wondering about. We were kind of talking about it. I don't know, Bram, do you have a theory about why these sticklebacks have spines on their back?
Maybe to help them swim.
Oh, that would be a good idea. You can start. You can
to
tip
get
the
through
net.
the muddy bits in the wetlands to try and catch what they need for food. Because if they didn't have all those spines, they might not be able to swim as fast as they could.
And I'm kind of thinking if something bigger wants to
Two
eat
or
them,
three.
and they've got nasty big spines sticking up out of them, they might not be
Some
such
have two and some
a
have
nice
three.
thing
Isn't
to
that
eat.
They wouldn't
interesting?
look very appetizing.
No.
Ruth, we
The
have an
sculpin looks
interesting-
better.
Some are two spines, and
With
some
a
are
little
three
tiny,
spines.
with a tiny little spine, yeah. Yeah.
They're seeing.
What are you finding back there, Rod?
Well, we're finding more and more sticklebacks. It is just rich with them, and we've got to keep them in the water so they don't suffocate. So we'll just start letting some of these go, will we? So you could net some of these and release them behind us. If you have a net, do you have a net?
Did everyone get a good look at this great big sculpin? Someone would like to let it go, but Dylan, I bet you'd like to have a good look at it first. You want to hang on to it? Get it heavy for me here. Here, both hands. Hold it up high and take a good look and
You
see
can
how
let it,
flat
maybe come
those
around and let
This is
you
so
can
fins
reach
are
amazing
into
in
against
those
the
here.
bottom.
You
I'll
just
give you
fish
some
design
water
you
for
for
wouldn't
that.
that.
know how many fish are in this little area without wading in and having a look for yourself. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Maya, and to all the kids out there having fun in the mud. Okay, now we're ready to get back to the Wetland Eye quiz for the answer to question number 3 and for the next question. Back to you, Miranda.
Okay, 82% of our viewers got this question right. The question was, which of these is not a wetland? And the answer was A, ocean. Good job. Our last question is, what is the name of the wetland that is salty soil that is flooded and exposed by tides and found along the shores of oceans and bays? The possible answers are A, soggy wheat field, B, prairie pothole, C, salt marsh, or D, peatland. Back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. Okay, everyone, make sure you get your answer in for the final question. Now, people didn't always realize the importance of wetlands and their benefits to people and wildlife. Let's go back to Della and Rick and learn about the threats to these very special places.
Acres of wetlands are being lost each year all over the world. We're here at the Julie Metz Wetland Bank along the Neabsco Creek in Woodbridge, Virginia. Mr. Swanson, please tell us about the threats of the wetlands.
Certainly, Della. Threats to wetlands are very, very numerous, and all kinds of different threats. Some of those threats include deposition of sediments from development in the upper headwaters of the watershed. You have threats from development under farming and mosquito control, where you're altering or you're amending the flows and the water quality coming into the wetlands. Dredging and stream channelization will have a huge impact on the ability of a wetland to filter water and purify water. Diversions and alterations, like I was speaking of earlier, of flows coming in can really have a huge impact. Development of impervious surfaces, roads, parking lots, all change the different hydrologic channels and what happens to the water as it comes off of that land and goes through that transitional zone into the wetlands. Another big concern is invasive species. Big concern for us right here. And then finally, overall, is the effects of climate change. So numerous threats. I'll give you just a starter list.
It's very quiet here, and it's a great place to look for birds and other wildlife. So with all of these threats to this special habitat, it's really important that we do what we can to help conserve wetlands, or maybe even create new ones. Back to you in Canada.
Thanks, Della and Rick. So there are lots of challenges to conserving wetlands. Dr. Butler, can you tell us if there are any particular threats to wetlands here and what's being done to tackle them?
Well, you know, wetlands everywhere, there was concern about them, and we used to think that they were all wastelands, and actually all over the world and all over North America, not long ago, that's what we thought, and even here, same thing. We thought that these were just wastelands. They really weren't of any value at all. But you know, you only know and care about what you really know, right? And it's really important that once you start to learn about these things, you realize that there's another value. And sometime, maybe 30, 40 years ago, we started to realize that, yes, indeed, there's lots of things here. There's lots of birds, there's lots of fish, and they really are important. So we started to set them aside, and Boundary Bay is one of those cases. This is now protected. It's an important bird area. In fact, it's the #1 bird area, important bird area in Canada. It's really a key place, and we know that now because we've studied this, so it's really important once you get to know that information that you can do something with it. It wasn't too long ago that we actually thought about draining some of these wetlands, and even here in Boundary Bay, that was sort of the thought, but we've learned an awful lot since then. We also know that there are some other potential threats on the horizon. One of those might be the changing climate, that with a change in the ocean temperature here, we know that fish take a different migratory route. Just a degree change in the ocean will make a difference in which route the fish will go. We also are a little bit worried that with climate change, if the ocean starts to change and warm up and it starts to come up, the tides come up higher, it'll push this wetland. It'll make the edge of the wetland come closer to the dike. So we'll have less of a wetland. So there may be fewer plants. As a result, there may be fewer invertebrates. And as a result of that, maybe fewer birds. So that is a concern here of these changes. We're fortunate that Boundary Bay is now protected, and it is set aside as an important bird area and many other designations, and it's recognized around the world, including the kids that are watching today.
Thanks, Rob. So there are lots of threats, but there are also many things that can be done to help wetlands, and you can be part of the solution. Be careful about what you pour down the drain, because that can go into wetlands. Dispose of oil and chemicals properly. Volunteer. Get involved in helping wetlands just like Maya, or by helping with cleanup days, removing invasive plants, planting underwater grasses or other plants. There are many organizations that protect your local watersheds, and you can get involved. Join or start a nature club. Learn about wetlands, just like you're doing today. Go to wetlands and enjoy watching the wildlife, and tell others about wetlands. And finally, You can also enter a video contest that we're having this year, and you can learn more about it at the WetlandsLIVE website. You and your class could win up to $1,000 for supporting field trips or other supplies, so please go there and enter. Okay, in a couple of minutes, we're going to start answering questions. Send them to the email address on your screen. But let's get that final answer to our Wetland Eye Quiz. Miranda?
82% answered correctly. The correct answer to answer 4 was C. A salt marsh, a type of wetland that has salty soil that is flooded and exposed by tides and found along the shores of bays and oceans. Thank you for playing this game with us here in Vancouver. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Miranda. So we've got one more student group waiting to report out to you about what they've been doing. They've been recording their bird observations. Maya, what have the birding students found?
Well, we're back with Holly Middleton, who has been making field observations with this group of students. Holly, can you explain a little bit about what you've been doing out here with these kids?
Yeah, I took the kids out to learn how to count birds, so how to identify them and how to count the numbers that are there. And so one thing we learned is when you have a big flock of birds, you want to figure out how many birds are there. And one way of doing that is figuring out first how many birds are in a very small area and getting used to counting how many are there. And say if there's 10 there, then you can find out how many there are in the blocks of different parts of the rest of the flock. And that way, that's how scientists estimate how many birds are there. Another way we do that is by listening for them. Each bird makes a different kind of noise, and by listening for all of those different sounds, you're able to count the birds without actually ever having to see them.
And how many species did you count? Was there a type of bird that was particularly common?
How many birds did we get, Olivia?
We got 130 birds.
That's a lot. And was there a bird that you saw a lot of?
There are a lot of ducks, right? That was probably the biggest number. But we had one really, really cool bird. Remember the peregrine falcon? Does anyone know how fast it can fly?
I do.
It flies at least 200 miles per hour.
That's right. That's the fastest animal on the planet, and we have it right here.
This is so cool. Boundary Bay is known as a birding hotspot, and you can see lots of birds out here right now. But the numbers of shorebirds are really high in the spring when millions stop here because of the wealth of worms and other food that's in the mud. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Maya. So this area is really like a grocery store for fish and birds. It sustains and feeds an incredible variety of plants and animals. Okay, we'd like to start answering your questions. Remember, send them to the email address on your screen. To get started, we're going to take a question from our students here at Boundary Bay. How does pollution affect wetlands? We've got our guest panelists back to join us. Come on in, Rob.
All right.
Why don't you get on in here? Thanks, guys. So how does pollution affect wetlands? Big question.
It can have all kinds of effects because the nutrients that come in the pollution can make the plants grow for a little while, but eventually what happens is it takes all the oxygen out of the water. And when that happens, then the animals that live here, the fish particularly, run out of oxygen. So this is not very good to have a lot of pollution around. The marshes help with some of that. They will absorb some of those pollutants, which is a good thing. But if you get too much of it, then it gets starved of oxygen.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, we have another question in from Logan in Boise, Idaho. How large is the wetland where we are today?
This is a big wetland in Boundary Bay. It's probably about 10 miles from one end to the other. And then maybe, you can see how far back here, maybe a couple hundred meters. So the wetland itself, the plants, is a very narrow band. But when the tide goes down, it's going to go down about a mile. So it's big. It's a big, expansive area.
Okay, our next question is from Eldred Vossler at Laura Wilder Elementary in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. What kinds of other animals live in the wetlands at Boundary Bay?
We saw coyote tracks.
Oh, cool.
We saw coyote tracks out in the water, and we saw a number of the crustaceans kind of washed up. They kind of come up in the intertidal, and lots of bugs, of course. And amazing the number of crustaceans. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
So, are there any recorded invasive plants that you guys have found here in Boundary Bay?
Well, I would love to answer that question.
Great.
There is a marsh grass that we think is out here called Spartina, which forms really dense clumps and kind of takes over and dries out the sections of the marsh that it's on. So that's a big problem. And this, just along the periphery, we're looking up on the dike here, and there are clumps of a grass called knotweed, not a grass. It's sort of bamboo-like and gets huge and has roots that go down 7 feet and then 20 feet in all directions. And where it grows, nothing else can grow it. It's almost impossible to get rid of it when it comes into an area. So it's a really big problem here, the knotweed.
Thank you.
Can I just add
please.
about I just talked to the person last night about the Spartina, who's been doing a lot of the volunteer work of trying to get rid of it on the bay. She says it's, they're feeling like they're getting a handle on it, but it's a really hard slug. And if you ever want to volunteer for something that's really hard, that's it. Okay. You're out digging these plants out.
So our next question comes from Amy Duke in Taos, New Mexico. How wet does a wetland need to be considered a wetland?
Oh, what a good question. I think what it means is that the water returns every year. There's water here all the time, so some of them will dry out and they will become dry for some of the year, but when it rains it fills again. So it has to have water on a regular basis because these plants that grow here are really dependent on that. So you could just look at the wetland, and if it's got a marsh, then it's likely got water for most of the year, and that would be a good measure dictating if it's a wetland or not.
And our next question from Michelle Tamez in Washington, D.C. How are the animals on the shore adapted to the changing tides which come in and out throughout the day?
Take that? Sure, I'll take a bit of it anyway. Yeah, it's not an easy life. They have to somehow create a situation where they can tolerate both fresh water and salt water, and that's not an easy bit. The crabs do it, classically by being able to hold on to some moisture, staying moist, staying usually under things. We found here at the low tide, the amphipods, which are a type of crustacean, were all under. A lot of them were under things where it's moist, so they kind of keep the moisture levels as much as possible. Some of them burrow, right, and handle that, but that's a real challenge to get to do both the salt and fresh at the same time.
Thanks. Our next question comes from the Young Women's Leadership Academy in Fort Worth, Texas. What is the biggest threat to wetlands water quality?
You want to take it, Ron?
Well, on the wetland right here, a big threat to water quality is the dike behind and the agricultural fields on the other side. And we have an outfall here, and we have fertilizers, sometimes pesticides, that will leach out. And the farm fields nearby are probably one of the biggest threats right here.
Okay, our next question actually builds on a previous one. A little more description on just what are invasive species, and that's a question from Mrs. Payton's class in New York.
Well, there are all kinds of species that are invasive, and we talked about the plants, but we can have all kinds of even little shrimpy things or various animals that come in perhaps on a boat from another part of the world that would settle here and have no predators and do really well and outstrip all the local animals and take over an area. So it can be a big problem. You think of any part of the plant or animal kingdom, anything, and there are invasives in all categories that we need to be thinking about.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Discovery Middle School students in Mansfield, Ohio. Is this wetland a healthy wetland? Why or why not?
I can take that. Yeah, we think this is a pretty healthy wetland. We've done quite a bit to protect it. We've set aside the legislation to protect that, and that was probably the major threat. Was we just thought it as a wasteland, but now it is protected, and it's got lots of designations. There's lots of people watching it. It doesn't mean that there's not issues and problems and things. There, all wetlands face these kinds of things, but this one is pretty secure. I think we're in pretty good shape here.
Great. We've got a question from Ms. Borisevic's class in Taneytown, Maryland. How do the plants grow if it's saltwater?
I can take that one. That's a great question. These are plants that are adapted to this to get rid of the salt, and they're able to take in the water as a result of that. So they're specially designed to deal with salt. They can't grow anywhere else. They actually need to have these kinds of conditions. And it makes it these special things. They're called halophytes because they are plants that can deal with salt.
Okay, Hunter from Cole Center, Pennsylvania wants to know, what is the most dangerous predator here?
You're giving that to me. The most dangerous predator. Well, we did hear earlier about the peregrine falcon, which is the fastest animal on the planet. It's a type of falcon that flies at, as we heard, 200 kilometers an hour. And so that one is pretty devastating because it can come in and catch a bird at that sort of speed and the bird isn't able to get away. Also, we have a lot of bald eagles. Bald eagles spend their winter here, and we have hundreds of them that spend their winter here catching the ducks and generally terrorizing everybody and chasing them around. And they're a pretty voracious predator as well. But they're birds that are more likely to go after things that are already hurt or that are more sick. Whereas the peregrine goes after things that are doing pretty well and that can fly pretty fast. So those are pretty cool predators, and that's pretty neat. So.
Thanks, Holly. So we've got another question from Mrs. Payton's class in New York. What makes the wetlands such ideal places for nurseries?
I can take that one again.
Take that one.
Yeah. One of the things is that these animals, when they're very small, of course, they're very vulnerable to predators, and it's really important that they have a place that's safe and then get away from some of those predators. So by hiding in the grass, that's one place they can hide. There's a plant down on the low tide that you can't see from here called eelgrass, and it's very, very extensive. If you walk through that eelgrass and look, you can't see the fish, but they're in there, and as you saw from the beach scene, there's lots and lots of them around. And they're feeding in there on all the little invertebrates and things that are clinging to the eelgrass plants. So there's lots and lots of food, and it's a safe place to be. And those fish can then grow and get to a fairly good size, and then they can reproduce, and that's what makes it a nursery.
Thanks, Rob. We have a question from Delaney Carlson in Missoula, Montana. Are there any plants in the wetlands that are carnivores? Maya, thanks.
Especially in bogs, you can find these plants that are called sundews, and they're carnivorous. And they look like mini Venus flytraps. They grow to be about the length of your pinky if they're very large. And instead of snapping shut really quickly, they are sticky, hence the name sundews. And they close very slowly with the bugs stuck to them. And they eat damselflies very commonly. And they will actually only get a very little bit of nutrient from digesting a bug, and it takes them days to digest it.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, our next question comes from Wendy Burlett in Shelton, Washington. If there is so much food in Alaska wetlands, why did the birds have to migrate?
That's a great question. There is a lot of food up in Alaska, but of course in the winter it freezes over, and eventually those birds will have to move out because it's going to be covered in ice and all the food won't be available to them. Many of them will come down here because we don't get very much ice, but there's others that carry on even further south. But it's largely because of that. It's largely because it freezes over and there's nothing for them in the winter.
Okay, we have a question from Colegio Brader in Panama. What challenges are you facing trying to protect wetlands?
This is a challenge all over trying to do this. The most important thing is just trying to get people aware, like we're trying to do here, of how important these are. Once people know this, then they will also go out and try to protect them. And there's lots of programs and things to try to encourage people, this is one of them, to understand how important these wetlands are. And people now across the hemisphere, in Panama, South America, North America, realize this, and kids realize this too. So this is the number one thing, is being aware of this. The next thing is then talking to the people in government and people who own the land about how important it is and trying to get it set aside and make it a special place for all the wildlife that's there.
Great. And finally, what time of the year would you come to Boundary Bay and see the largest number, and find the largest number of birds?
That would be during the spring migration, when we have the shorebirds that are coming up here. You can have upwards of 500,000 birds just here in this area here. And if you can imagine how many birds would have to fit into that you could fit into here, it's chock-a-block. It's completely jammed with birds. Another really good time to come here is during the winter, during this time of year. And that's a different kind of bird that we have here. We have a lot of ducks that spend the winter here. We have about 200,000 birds. The ducks, the 3 different species of ducks that spend their winter here. And so they're all spending the time in the marsh and in the eelgrass and far out in the marine areas. And during the nighttime, they're spending all their time up in the farmlands, eating the potatoes that were left behind and the different grasses that we have planted here for cattle, but also for the waterfowl in particular to encourage them to stay here. So there's 2 times that are really good. Winter is really good, but so is the spring migration. And that's because there's different types of birds here, but there's always something really cool to look at.
So we have time for one more quick question, and this comes from Atlanta, Georgia. How do extreme temperature fluctuations affect the wetland ecosystem? Briefly.
Well, you can imagine if it got very, very hot and dry in a wetland, the water will dry up and those plants will disappear. They just can't survive. They have to have the water. If it gets very, very wet, well, that's a little bit better, but they can drown them as well. So if you get those big fluctuations, you've got real problems.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you all for your great questions, but that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more about wetlands, go to the WetlandsLIVE website, where we've got lots of information for you to use to explore the wetlands in your area. Remember, wetlands are incredibly rich ecosystems that are very important for people and wildlife. I hope you get out there, learn more, volunteer to help, and conserve these very special places. Thanks to the class, students, Maya, Miranda, and our special guests for being with us today, and I want to thank all of you for watching. I also want to thank our sponsors, the U.S. Forest Service and Shaw TV Canada. We have a couple more Wetlands Live events coming up, so please join us in Panama on March 8th and from Alaska on May 9th. And teachers, please fill out the evaluation form on the Wetlands Live website. Your feedback helps us improve our programming. As an incentive for filling out the survey, everyone will receive a Woodsy Owl bookmark, and you will be entered into a raffle. 5 classrooms will be randomly selected to receive a box full of educational goodies from Woodsy Owl and Smokey the Bear. Remember, you only care about what you know about. Again, thank you all for watching and joining us today.